Hi, and welcome to RealClearFetish Talks RealClearPlay, a podcast that dives into sober life, kink life, and everything in between. This week, I'm going to Canada, and I think that is the first time I've gone to Canada. I may be wrong. There's been quite a few episodes now, so I don't really remember. But before I start, if you notice the background is a bit sparse at the moment, it's because I'm just about to move location and moving property. If you're listening to it, you don't care because you're not seeing anything anyway. But that is why the background looks a bit bare at the moment. I'm about to move next week. So the next two episodes after this will be in a different location and you will see it at that point. But let's get back to the episode and welcome Tyler. Hi, Tyler.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm very good. The sun is shining, not that anyone can see that, but it's very nice weather here today. And it's
Oh,
also, as this is pre-recorded, this is going to be long overgone. It's also semi-final of the second part of Eurovision this evening.
that's true. I'm being in Canada. I'm like, "Ah, is it?
Completely oblivious to what's going on in Europe.
It's also the NHL playoffs, just for all our North American listeners. But my
That's,
team's already out, so I don't
um, I don't
know.
even know what that is.
The National Hockey League.
I was about to say, how long can I talk with a Canadian before the hockey is mentioned?
There you go.
There you go, within the first 5 minutes.
30
Fantastic.
seconds.
Well, as I took with every episode, I start with four standard questions and then we just see where the conversation goes.
All right.
To start with, names, pronouns, and title.
Yes, so my name is Tyler, he, him. Um, no titles in particular. I mean, I think I've had all sorts of different titles depending on what kind of connection I have and where we're going, but nothing sort of formalized, or I don't have any type of kink or fetish name I go by in particular. Yeah.
Fantastic, fantastic. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm 37. I live in Nova Scotia, Canada. So for some people who don't might not know where that is like the furthest east, right on the Atlantic Ocean. It's a very beautiful part of Canada. I feel very lucky. Like I have the ocean 5 minutes away. Like a 5 minute walk, it's right there. I feel very lucky for that. But I'm not originally from here. I actually grew up in Winnipeg, Manitoba. So that's like central Canada. So it's very like farmlands, flat, a city, but yeah, very far from here. I spent also 12 years in Montreal. I moved there at 18 and I lived there until I was 30 before I moved out here. I came here for school, which we'll talk a little bit about later because it's all part of the story. And I've been here now for 7 years. So yeah,
Fantastic. I'm very jealous that you live on the coastline. That must be lovely.
it is very lucky. Yeah, I feel very grateful to be out here next to the ocean.
And a question I ask everyone, completely sober, clear-headed, or social drinker?
Social drinker.
Social
Yes.
drinker.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
definitely. I yeah, I stopped using drugs at one point in my life, reevaluated alcohol. It wasn't really necessarily a problem for me. I don't necessarily get drunk. I don't enjoy that. I don't like the idea of feeling inebriated. But as I kind of went through things, I was able to kind of realize that that was something I could keep around, and that was fine. And my body actually really just sort of made that decision for me. I feel like it was just like 2 beers, you're done. Like my body just doesn't take anymore, and I've learned to listen to my
I,
body.
I was about to say that's called being 37.
Also true.
But I can get a hangover just from like sugary drinks nowadays. I
Oh
love when
yeah.
people kind of go just like, oh, you don't drink, no more hangovers. It's like, no, no, we still have hangovers. It's just sugar hangovers or caffeine hangovers.
Oh gosh,
Horrible.
I'm all like, yeah, right. I'm all paranoid about salt. I'm like, oh, I'll be up all night peeing. Like,
The last question. What is clear play to you and why is it important?
I love that question, and I always love hearing people's answers on the podcast for this. I think it's so cool. I mean, for me, like what it means is just being present, with whatever I'm doing, whether that's with other people, but also even with myself. Like, I think that's also like a big part. Like, if you're playing with yourself or your toys or whatever, I like to be like present and connected to my body and figuring out like what I'm doing and what I like. And that's kind of the same thing with other people. It's just sort of about, yeah, being able to be present and really kind of enjoying what you're doing and knowing you're enjoying it and getting that gratification and connection. It's very cool. And why is it important to me? For me, like clear play and having a sober fetish life is just really about like harmony in my life and balance and just like getting to keep something that I really love. Like for me, that's what's really important. I think back to when I, had so many encounters where what I was doing was great and I enjoyed it, but just because I was using, like, I had so much shame after, or I felt like shit after, or I pushed my body like crazy and all these things, and so that all got really messed up and mixed up. And now I just feel it's so important to me because it just feels like I can really just be who I am, and feel really proud of that, and not just proud of like, getting what I want and, having the sex I want or having the connections I want, but also, in that level of like, that's a part of me and it's who I am. And I can just be open about it on all fronts and being comfortable with that and not having any of that like shame or feeling like I'm hiding parts or anything like that. Like I can just really be that part of myself in all aspects of my life, no matter who I'm talking to. I'm comfortable in that and I don't have that sort of shame or guilt attached to it. So it's really important to keep that, because for me, that's really important. So,
It's when you become sober and you kind of dive into kink life and so on, you realize how much time it takes up. Like it's one thing using the drug, but then there's the recovery afterwards. And
yeah.
it's not just like 2, 3 days. You have like a week, 2 weeks where you more or less don't function. You're a zombie. So
Yeah.
I very much relate to like connection with the body because you push your body to the outer limits of what it
Yeah.
actually can take. And the amount of times after I've used, I get sick. It's
Yeah.
just like fevers, chills, stuff like that, because my body just is hating me for it.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I agree. I think like it's like going that hard on your body. And then for me, like then just pretending like it's okay when you're going through your week at work or whatever is extra exhausting. Like mentally, that is so tiring. You can't take care of yourself because you're trying to just like go on with life in this way that isn't sustainable. And yeah, that was really tough for sure. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So you say you didn't grow up where you are now. How did you go? How was it growing up? Were you kinky from a young age, or did that just come further along, and when did the drugs start?
So for me, it was very like I grew up in Winnipeg, which is a big city. It's like over a million people, so it's not like a tiny town or anything. But we had like a cottage in the woods on an island with solar power and an outhouse and all this stuff. So I kind of grew up sort of between two worlds, of living in the city half the year and then spending time out on an island and fishing and running around in the woods and being 10 and getting to take off in a boat and do whatever you want alone. I had a lot of freedom and it was really great. Like I really, really enjoyed that. And then when I became a teenager, like I knew I was gay. I always knew I was gay. I started telling people when I was like 14, and by 16, I was like out. I told my family, I was out at school. I was like out. I was like pride stuff, which like late 90s, early 2000s, Winnipeg was like, still you didn't see that often in high school. So
No.
uh, it was very freeing, to be myself. I was a very anxious kid and very shy. And, uh, I always had a lot of energy and I loved connecting with people when I got over that. But I had a lot of barriers to that. So when I was coming out and kind of figuring that out and ended up changing schools, like it was really like a lot happening. And like all teenagers, I experimented with all sorts of stuff at that age, And I actually remember I tried drinking and I didn't like it because I didn't like being hungover.
Mm.
But then I started using different drugs and I like that because when you're young and full of energy, you can bounce back really easy and it felt so
Yeah.
much better. So I actually started using pretty young. I was, smoking weed and at a young age, and then actually started using a lot of other drugs because I was a raver. I was a part of rave culture and I was a punk. Like I was a punk raver. So I'd go to punk shows and raves. And so it was just around, all the party drugs were around. So that's sort of how I kind of got into that. But I also just really enjoyed it because it helped me just kind of be like, I don't give a shit if people call me faggot at school. I don't care about this. I'm going to be myself. I'm going to cut a 6-inch mohawk. I'm going to wear fat pants. I'm going to have colored bracelets all over. Like, it gave me like the confidence I think I needed to just be able to be myself, because that is who I am. And I know that's who I am without substances, but it sort of helped me in that moment to kind of get over that. So that was good in that sense. Like, I mean, good, I'm looking back, I could look back and be like, oh, there's stuff that whatever, but it wasn't like a negative time. I was having a pretty good time. I had a good group of friends with me, and I was getting to explore who I was and be comfortable, and that was nice. And as far as being kinky, yeah, I always kind of knew something was going on there, and I stumbled across like fetish porn when I was pretty young and just was like, that's what I like. I know that's what I like. There's just kind of no turning back. And yeah, and I do remember like my first like kinky encounter when I was maybe 17 or 18 with someone around my age. Like, I say now around my age, at the time they felt so much older because they were like a year older too. But they were into it and explored, kind of introduced me to some role playing, bondage and stuff. And it was like, oh, okay. And that was kind of that.
Something was unlocked.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I feel
So,
like it always was, because I just stumbled across that porn when I was young, knew I liked it, and, just kind of went from there. And
so
yeah.
what kind of kinks do you like?
I mean, I think I'm pretty like open to whatever. I mean, we all have like our preferences and things we like more than others, but yeah, I think it depends on the connection. I have some of the things I like more than others.
You started weed and so on, and you say you stopped drug taking
2019.
2019. What brought you to that point? What happened in 2019 that kind of made you go, do you know what? I need a change.
There's more like, it wasn't like a moment in 2019. There was definitely like a buildup.
Yeah.
I feel like it's sort of part of like the whole story.
And what
um,
what what was leading up to it then? What
yeah,
happened up to into the lead into it?
yeah. So essentially, because I just kind of started using it when I was pretty young, I definitely didn't develop some of the coping skills I needed to, or other ways to manage certain things in my life. I think I just had, substances were around, and that was just how I learned to do that in those formative years. So I kind of just, that was what I did and moved on with my life. At 18, I moved to Montreal, and I had a really great time there. I don't know if I've been to Montreal, but I know anyone who has knows it's a pretty great city, and it's rocking, man. It's happening. There's lots going on. And yeah, I had a great time, with friends. I was DJing, and we were throwing these underground queer parties, and, it was just part of the lifestyle, like using and all of that, and having a lot of fun. But then when I reached my late 20s, I started to just feel like things weren't really, I wasn't content. Like, I knew I was feeling restless.
Mm.
I knew that something kind of wasn't working. And sorry, also, I feel like I forgot a whole big part of this thing. So when I was a teenager, I was in this like peer program. It was just volunteer or whatever, where it was like harm reduction. So they taught you all sorts of stuff around sex and drugs and all sorts of things with this harm reduction lens. And you do trainings, they teach teenagers so they could tell their friends, and this is kind of thing like that. So that got me like very interested in harm reduction work and community work.
And I would say that's quite progressive because when you talk to a lot of other kids, when we were kids, it was very much like say no and it's bad and so on.
Yeah.
So having a harm reduction program for people around that age, that's amazing.
Yeah, yeah, it was very, very cool. Like, it was a really neat program. I was very lucky to be in it. I mean, I also am just like, I was very lucky because I had the information I needed at that age to be safe in what I was doing,
Mm.
which is really great, even if I was pushing it a lot and as safe as wanted
Well,
to be.
I guess well, if you hadn't had that program, you it might be a very different situation.
100%. Yeah, I agree. I think it gave me a lot of really good information. And it also just launched like the next 12 years of my life. I moved to Montreal and I started working in community organizations and like buying for organizations for drug users' rights, homeless people, sex workers' rights. It was working just with a lot of people who had lived experience, like myself, no education, like formalized education. And it was really great. Like, I loved what I was doing in Montreal. So that was also part of what was happening. I was in like these movements and working in these environments where people either maybe were in recovery and had stopped using, or were still actively using, or were still involved, or whatever. Like, it was very buy and for in a lot of ways, and a lot about like decriminalizing drugs and, sex workers' rights and drug users' rights, and people need access to clean gear. And this was all like part of my life, what I did and what I really cared about in my work and my colleagues and my friends. And it was just everything. So that was my 20s, and we were throwing parties, and it's just like a lot happening. But then as I kind of got, near the end of my 20s, I just started feeling restless, with stuff, and things weren't working out. And also just a lot of people in my life who are good friends and still good friends, they were all kind of moving on. Like they were doing other things, having kids, going to school, moving away, all sorts of stuff. And so I just felt like my world was kind of getting smaller and smaller. And I felt really stuck. Like I didn't know how to sort of move on with my life. I knew it wasn't working, like the fun train had stopped. Like the downs were too down. I was getting into situations that were like way over my limits more and more often. I wasn't comfortable with what I was doing. The types of substances I was using and how I was using them was changing. I was keeping a lot of that secret from the people around me, and we'll talk about that in a second around kink and then my life. But so just all these things weren't working, and then I eventually decided to really hustle and move out here to Nova Scotia, go to school in a program totally different. Like I just needed a change. I had like lived my whole life. It was like an identity piece, being around drugs and drug users' rights and all this stuff. And so I just needed to be a different person. I just needed to develop other parts of who I am and explore other things. So I moved to Nova Scotia and I picked up school in a totally different profession, working as like an interpreter in languages, and loved it. Was super into it. And I just was full on in school. I was working like 2, 3 jobs sometimes, going to school. I had really been like, moving on with my life, doing other things. But the thing that just kind of kept hanging on was every once in a while I would go on a big binge.
Yeah.
And it just started becoming really like, it was so like it just didn't match with my life anymore, because I had moved here and I was making new connections, making new people who weren't in that world, who weren't doing that. That wasn't what was going on. So it almost felt like this double life was kind of happening. And I was just doing something a lot harder in my life that needed my attention. I couldn't kind of keep rearranging my brain every once in a while. And it wasn't for fun. Like it wasn't at that point, I would just go a long periods of time and not use. And then I'd get super stressed. I'd be really afraid of all these changes going on, school. And then I'd use and I'd have to pick up those pieces. And it just wasn't working. So 2019, I was going to my last year of school. I had done 2 years. I was doing really well. I was getting great marks. My mentors, my teachers, everyone was really gunning for me. They're like, you're going to be really good at this. And I freaked out. I was freaking out, because I was kind of changing my life so much. Like I was becoming this new person. I was going to try and move up a class. Like I lived paycheck to paycheck my whole life. So I was hoping to make more money and all these things. And that first month of school, I freaked out. I was afraid of the change. And I went on 2 really big binges in a month. I had one weekend where it was right at the beginning. And I remember going into school and just trying to keep it together. And people, like one of my teachers commenting something was up. And I was just like, oh my God, like, holy crap. And then there was a hurricane here and everything shut down. And I was like, thank God I got 3 days free pass. I'm just going to like sleep it off. But then a month later, it happened again. And I went into school on Monday and I snapped at a professor of mine about something totally like fine, like no big deal. Like it wasn't a big deal. But like I knew, right? Like that wasn't okay. And I know why that happened. And it scared me. Like I just had this moment where I was just like, I've worked super hard for 2 years to make these changes. I'm really trying to do other things in my life. This isn't working. What I'm using, how I'm using is changing and getting more serious. And yeah, so I kind of just at that point was like, if you're gonna step into this new life, you got to slam that door. Like that's not happening. Like you can't keep fooling yourself. This isn't sustainable. I had set up a million rules for myself. This substance, but not this substance. All the stuff, and trying to figure it out. And and I think that was all part of the process. I'm not like knocking that. I think I had to take the time it took to get to where I was at. But yeah, I was just freaked out, and I was like I don't think I had a rock bottom. I think I had like a scared straight moment. I was like, I don't want to lose this. I am ready for like this next chapter of my life. and I'm ready to kind of close that door. So that's when I finally was made the decision, and I started using language like I'm in recovery. I started telling people, I started like, counting a year, 2 years. Like I never did that before, even when I had periods where I wouldn't use,
Yeah.
because the accountability piece of really putting it out there is something else too.
Well, yeah, there is definitely power in accountability and managing what you've achieved, and it is difficult. And I recognize, like, going into work after a binge and people commenting on me. I'm very pale, so when you have a blood pressure of almost 200, you get very red faced. And I had like a couple of people was like, "Oh, you look very tan today." I was just
Yeah.
like, "No, no, no, no. I just have really high blood pressure right now." So I recognize that in myself, where going into work and people just noticing something's up, and how nerve-wracking that is.
Yeah, that's scary. You feel like the mental energy of feeling like you're hiding something, like in the moment is really hard, but I feel like that really perpetuates a bit of the cycle too, right? Like I think that shame that you feel and that I have a dirty secret, just makes it harder sometimes to step out of that.
And you mentioning the rules about, like, oh, I won't do this or I won't do that and so on. And as soon as you're off, the rules are out the book, out the door. So I
Yeah.
recognize that so much, so much.
Oh, totally, eh? And like for me too, even though I was kind of like always, in this kind of lifestyle or whatever, I being gay men, the party and play scene and all of that, like that was very separate for me. Like I hung out with in Montreal, like I was a punk and I was an anarchist and I was an anti-capitalist. And I still identify with a lot of those in different ways, but that was what it was all about at that point, right? It really
Mm,
was like about the politics and the beliefs and the values. And so I had a really strong disconnect from any type of fetish community, or people. That wasn't my life. I hung
mm,
out with the radical queers and all the weird freaks and weirdos because at that time in Montreal, like women weren't allowed in most of the gay bars, and there was all these, like, it was a different time, and I didn't
mm,
connect with that. And I was, I listened to punk rock music and all these things, and I just never felt a connection to that because I was like, can't we talk about Black Flag? Like, I don't know what you're talking about. So it was also that was kind of messing up my head because I'd go have this whole life and I was open about being kinky and obviously it was a very sex positive thing. And, it's not like I wasn't having a life in there too. However, this like leather and kink and all the things I like that. It's like I was like really wanted that, but I couldn't kind of build that connection naturally. So it often ended up being like late night hookups, going to the saunas,
mm,
partying here, ending up there. And it's so there was always this disconnect and this double life feeling for me
mm. Yeah.
that was going on that just wasn't healthy either. It wasn't putting me in the best situations. Not to say I didn't have great, partners or experiences in all of that, but there was still like a bit of this disconnect, and I think I found it hard to kind of connect with that community, just kind of being more alternative and having different sort of like politics and interests and
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of commercialization of the gay community, really. So if it's something you're not identify with, and I fully agree with, there should be allowed women in gay spaces and so on. And I do go to bars where it's men only, but it's I have no issue with it being mixed, and I do think it should be mixed. And I've met fetish women in the past where I'm just like, I couldn't do half the shit they do. Jesus. When
Mhm.
I remember one year running into this lesbian couple going to Berlin, and they're because at Easter Berlin, it's mainly just like men one side, and then there's like this underground of fetish women.
Yeah.
And these women was like, "Oh yeah, I'm going to Berlin. I'm gonna be hoist up in hooks on my back and da 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 da." And she had a leg injury. She was like, "No, no, I'm still going. That's fine." I was like, "I'll
Amazing.
live with it. It's okay." And I
Amazing.
was just so impressed. But yeah, so I fully
Yeah.
agree with you on there. So
Yeah. And yeah, just that disconnect was kind of there for me.
do
So
you feel there's a less of a disconnect now? Have you been able to connect with the fetish community in a slightly, if I can kind of assess from what you were talking about. So your entrance to fetish kind of were intertwined with the partying a bit
A little bit, yeah.
because of
Like,
the disconnect.
yeah, like it just sort of was like a thing that I knew I liked and I talked about openly with my friends, but it was very like I go there for sex. Do you know what I mean? Like it didn't feel like a whole person, right? There was missing that part.
Mm.
And I had, as I grew up, and things shifted, and when I was like 21, I had, like all 21-year-olds, you have a very, you're like, I know best and I know my values and everything is pretty black and white. And, you
Mm.
kind of dig your heels in and all of that. And so funny. Like I feel like I look back and I was this staunch anarchist, and it's like no gods, no masters, and then secretly inside I'm like, but a third be okay, like you know what I mean? Like it's like kind of funny, but I think with time that's where I kind of just started to like make more connections, and then in my mid 20s I got a job working like around the gay village in Montreal at a gay men's health organization, and that was a big shift for me. That helped me sort of connect with gay men and more mainstream queer people or whatever you want to say
Mm.
because I just was like around people in a different capacity, and that gave me that opportunity. I also played water polo my entire time living in Montreal. I played water polo as a teenager, so I was part of the gay team in Montreal. So that was my other entry, and that's one of the things that I've always liked about kink and also about sports is those were how I can connect with other like queer people, because those are like things that I enjoy, and they put me like I like activities and I like doing stuff with people. So that's been really positive for me in my life and has been like a thread of me, having more friendships, like connecting with queer people and gay people. And fetish is also that. Like it's definitely shifted for me. It used to be the opposite, and now I'm like, no, and I realized that I had like a realization. I think before I was like, yeah, that's all mainstream, da da da. And then, as I got older, I was like, man, being a leather daddy's punk as fuck. Like, like it takes a lot of courage to do that and be that and have different kinds of relationships and be out there and kinky and comfortable. And, and I think it's very counterculture. It's very anti-mainstream in a lot of ways, not to say there's not aspects of that, but you know what I mean? I think my brain
Oh,
opened
you
more.
you
It was
you
like,
can.
oh,
It's weird when you look at the leather scene. You have mainstream leather guys where I would say I fall under that category. I have langlets. I have all the like the stuff a typical clone would have. But
right.
then there's also leathermen who do they're completely their own thing.
Yeah.
Either lean towards the 80s of more studs and so on, and then you have the punks, the skinheads, and so on. There's so many different types of leather scene, and it doesn't always have to be the brands. It does not always have to be that.
Yeah.
So there's
Oh,
different subcultures in the leather culture as well, which is really fun.
exactly. And I think that's what I didn't see at the time because I didn't have that connection. I didn't have the mentors. I didn't have the people telling me that. I just had my assumptions, of what that was, and having trouble kind of connecting to that. So that just took time for me to kind of figure out and realize. But I agree. And when I say like mainstream too, I'm not even like I'm thinking just more like I just had such a niche counterculture life at that time. Most things everyone does every day. It's like I'd be like, no. Now I'm like, whatever. I
I'm
live
not
life.
gonna
I own
do
a car
that. I'm.
now. I had a lot of anger,
Well,
but
I think that's very common for like in your 20s. You kind of want to be. I was very much the opposite. I wanted to fit in. I've never fitted in. I was always the geeky kid. So
right.
as soon as I kind of could fit into what a stereotypical start 20s gay guy would be,
Yeah.
it was like bleached hair, tank tops. I was such a twink. It's ridiculous. But
Awesome.
I got to 22 and then I kind of started exploring the leather stuff and but all my friends were like twinks.
Yeah.
So I was all of a sudden a little bit like, oh, he's into fisting. A little bit poked fun at, but that
Yeah.
was fine. I grew up with it and it's interesting to have different approaches to what gay life would be because I'm so much more into like pop music and stuff like that and
Yeah.
more the poppy side and then I've just kind of developed with time
Yeah.
um where you're more or less the counter opposite of me, where you're just like, no, I'm gonna, don't want that.
Well, I would say I was. I think now I'm a little more of
Well,
a rounded person,
but
and
but that's the thing. You grow up, you reevaluate. It doesn't have to. You don't have to get rid of your values, but you grow up. You get a bit more mature, and you all of a sudden you kind of is like, well, I can look back and laugh at that a little bit.
oh, 100%, and I like, yeah, I laugh all the time at silly things where I'm just like, I catch myself still, like, I call it like old punk syndrome, where I just catch myself like being really stubborn about something and being like, it's fine, Tyler. You can relax. So for example, like I now own a car. I bought a car and I drive it and I got it. And it was like it had automatic windows and a sunroof. And like I refused to use the air conditioning and I refused to like turn it on because that was bougie. Like I didn't refuse, like I knew, but I just my gut was like, no, no. And I was like, chill out, Tyler. Like it's so weird. It's like I catch myself and I laugh and people around me laugh and my partner pokes fun at me and he's like, you live in the suburbs now. I'm like, don't say that.
You become what you hate. Oh no.
Yeah, well, the suburbs is next to the ocean here, so that's a trade-off.
Well,
um
yeah, it's I'm very jealous of that. So
yeah,
having the
and
ocean so close, you surf, right?
yes, I love
Yeah.
surfing.
When did you get into that?
So it's interesting. I actually started surfing when I was in Montreal, even though I wasn't on the ocean. I always liked being in the water. Like I played water polo for a long time. I grew up on an island half the time swimming. Like water was my jam. I loved spending time in water. Yeah, I had never really traveled or been anywhere where you could surf. Randomly enough, you can surf in the river in Montreal on standing waves in the rapids. There's like
Okay.
rapids and people surf them. So a friend brought me along and I got hooked and I just really loved it. And it was actually really good because I was at a pretty, like, it was at that point in my late 20s when I was like, things aren't working in my life. I'm not really happy with this. I'm just like, yeah, I started like, I'd finished work at 10 o'clock at night in the village and I was going to the bar more and more after and just getting drunk because I was
Yeah.
restless and not happy. Then I discovered surfing. And all of a sudden I had a reason kind of to be like, go home after work because you want to get up and surf first thing in the morning before you go to work. And I bought a little cheap surfboard and built a rack on my bike because I just rode my bike everywhere at the time. And I'd bike down and surf in the morning and go to work. And it was just this thing that kind of built. And then when I was looking at schools for the program I wanted to do, one of them was here. And I was like, at that point, just hooked on surfing. And I was like, great, I can go to school in this city, be right in the ocean so I can surf more. I can, like, pick up school. I was itching for a change. It's very outdoorsy here. And I think part of me had kind of been like, I was just living a city life and I liked it, but I was ready to kind of step away. And I knew I needed a change. So it was kind of good. Surfing sort of was like one of the things that kind of helped me kind of gain some confidence and feel some like inspiration at a time when I was feeling pretty like in a rut and not very happy with my life. And so it was part of one of the things that sort of helped me kind of start to reevaluate things in my life and try something I'd never done and be like, oh, you can do it. Okay. So if you can do that, you can do other things. Maybe you could go to school because I'd never been to school. And it kind of convinced myself I was like, I'm not good at school. Not true. Just scared. And then same thing when it came to making those changes to get sober. I was like, it's scary, but you can do it. You can do these things. So that was kind of cool that it kind of all connected into where I'm at now. And I feel pretty lucky about that.
So when you completely stopped the drug taking, how did you find navigating? Well, in most cases, when we've used for a while, navigating mo emotions can be quite triggering, or can
Yeah.
be quite hard work because we kind of lose some of the ability. How did you manage to kind of work that out?
That's a really great question. Again, it's all context. I feel like there's just so much. It's like
Hmm.
I kind of laugh because I feel like my story was just like I slowly chipped away and made very slow changes over like a period of time. So I feel like I'm always like, oh yeah, that was happening too, and that was happening too. But so to put it all in context, when I was young and I had just moved to Montreal, I was in a very abusive relationship for a year. And then when it ended, it was also very difficult after. There was a lot of abuse after that happened, trying to leave. And I was quite young. I was like 19, 20. And at the time, it wasn't a thing that was spoken a lot about between men at that time. Already abuse is something that people don't really talk about, and it really wasn't talked about then. So I managed to get out, and I was very grateful for that. And I had a really good community of friends helping me through that, which was really great. And I just moved there, so I'd only been there a couple of years, so I felt really grateful that I had found some really great people there. But I didn't even recognize it as like abusive or identify as a survivor at the time or really give it the attention it needed. I was just like, crazy, gotta get out of here, gotta change it up, whatever. And I never dealt with it. And that was kind of the common thread as well in my 20s, was that I just never addressed that. I never talked about it. And that made it very difficult for me around intimacy and dating and partners. And it was very, very hard for me. And that was one of the things I liked about drugs, is that it just made me be like, done, connection, bye brain, like, which is like, it's just that I gravitated towards that, because I had so much, like, those were just such high stakes situations for me without me even knowing. Fast forward, into my like sort of late 20s, put some pieces together, started being like, wow, that was actually really bad. And that was abuse. And okay, that's what was going on. And anyone would know if I told you what happened. It's like very obvious, but just kind of shut it down, didn't want to think about it. And then just that lack of support and awareness around that for queer people. I don't want to say just between men. I think at that time too, just all sorts of queer people you don't see. So that was really good. So I moved to Halifax in 2018. I met somebody and we were starting to see each other. And very short, they started demonstrating like some controlling behavior. We started using a lot of drugs. Everything got really, really intense. Didn't last long. I knew I needed to get out of there, got out of there. But it was sort of like this catalyst moment where I was like, oh, this is this pattern, like not saying every person I've been with is abusive. I've had some great partners and all of that stuff. But it kind of clicked about something was going on in relationships that wasn't working for me. And that was actually my first step before I even started thinking about not using drugs, is I was like, I need to actually sort this out. And I feel super lucky because randomly enough with that person, we went to an event and there was a speaker there talking about who's got this cutting edge, one of the best in Canada, intimate partner violence between men support programs. It's free for people. They're looking to get people. So I was like, ended that, started going to that, and just dug in to, the abuse that I had experienced and the effects that it had on me and my ability to cope. And that was an amazing experience, because it was a very structured thing. It was very like, okay, you're coming in, first session, family for an hour. Second session, drug use, substances for an hour. Third session, relationships for an hour. Like employment, la, 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 la. Go through it. And they give you like a report almost to be like, here's what we see. Here's what we think we can work on. Let's go for it. And that was the first time I really kind of had it laid out in front of me, where, they were like, yeah, this is what's going on. And this is how it relates to substances. And I wasn't ready at the time. I was like, I want to do this, but I was still like, I'll use these, but not those. And then a year later, 2019 hit, and I was still in that program. So when that happened, what I mentioned before, where I kind of like had a couple binges and was like, went back to my therapist and was like, all right, like that's got to go too,
I'm now ready.
Yeah. So I feel very lucky because I had the support of a really amazing counselor during all of that. So there was managing emotions and managing stress and figuring that all out. But it was also all mixed in with sex and relationships, and then in the fetish scene, party and play, it's there. And so I felt so lucky that I had that support. So it was tough, and it's still, always a thing, and it will be a thing, but that was a big help for me in that moment.
It's hard to talk about abuse in relationship, and especially as men. I think it's even worse. Not that I'm not downplaying women's abuse. That's horrible. I grew up in. My mom had a boyfriend who was abusive, so I've been in women's shelters, all that as a kid. Don't remember much of it, but it's there. I have that damage. So being in a relationship with someone who's abusive and you're the man that's getting the abuse, there is so much stigma around it. We kind of just like, oh, it's fine, put that away. So it's nice to hear that you can talk openly about it and you also addressed it. eventually, and you realize there was an issue, there was some trauma that needed to be looked at. I know from my mother, some of the trauma she struggles with is loud voices or arguments makes her nervous nowadays.
Yeah.
So that trauma sits there.
Mhm.
So it's, and I don't, how do you feel now about that trauma? Do you feel like it's gone away or do you just manage it slightly better?
I would say that it's managed quite well at this point. It's
Mm.
crazy. I was talking with a friend the other day, and I realized that this is almost 20 years ago now, so it's a long time. you know,
Yeah.
it's that feels like a very long time ago now. And for me, I think there are certain things around that I'm able to recognize now that where I call it the flutter. I get the flutter.
Mm.
Feel my chest. I feel something
Yeah, yeah.
around certain things, but I feel very comfortable to just be like, oh, that's what's happening. All good, like no big deal there. Like moving on. It doesn't really hijack anything at this point, if that makes sense.
That
I think,
makes perfect sense. Yeah.
yeah, like I remember being in therapy and talking to my counselor about this, and he was like, he asked me, what do you want to forgive your abuser? And I said, I don't think I ever can. He asked me, well, what would that mean for you? What would healing mean for you? And I said, I have no idea. Because I couldn't imagine being healed at that point. I didn't
Mm.
know what that meant.
Yeah.
He put it really well, where he just was like, at some point, you know, things that you have a reaction to will just become information. And that's a really good marker to know that you've healed from something. And I was like, okay, and I noticed that shift happen, and even like how I'm talking now, I could never have talked like this 4 years ago, 5 years ago about it. Now
Mm.
it just feels like information. Not to say I don't have fears, not to say I don't see things flutter up every once in a while with certain things, and I have to kind of be like, that's not happening, or oh, that's just a feeling, it's not reality. But it doesn't overtake like it did at other times in my life. It doesn't steer my life in directions I'm not comfortable with. I was never, when it came to using like heavier drugs, using crystal meth, for example, that was where things got really difficult for
Mm.
me. I was never a regular user. It was very like binge, shame, nothing for a while, with that drug
Same.
and hide it and whatever. And as I grew and that lifestyle was being left behind, it became more and more apparent that when I did use, it was to cope. And I was coping because something was happening, right? So
Mm.
I was able to start making those connections. And that's where it kind of brings back to that like managing emotions, managing triggers, managing all these things. Yeah, it was interesting. So I feel now like around it, I feel quite comfortable. And a lot of it has to do with confidence too. I think that's what makes me feel good about this now in my life. And one of the things that I'm very grateful for everything that I've had in my life, all these experiences, even if they've been pretty rough at times. I think about how it held me back from certain things. I mean, it offered lots of great things. Like, I mean, in my 20s, I had a lot of great experiences and I had a lot of good stuff as well happening. And I'm very content. But it's nice to kind of be at a place where I can just kind of appreciate what's that kind of made me be. I really had to explore what my limits and boundaries are, who I am, what I'm comfortable with, all these things. And I feel very comfortable sharing that and, understanding the kinds of people I want to keep around me and why and what I, need out of relationships, like all relationships, you know. And that's been like one of the best gifts in the world, and that's given me that confidence. And that was a big part for me. I think having lived through that abuse, I had no confidence in my 20s,
Mm.
at all. And I really felt like I was broken and unlovable. And it was my fault, you know. And yeah,
That-
uh, I carried that for a long time.
Mm.
So it was just so liberating to move past that, And now I really love myself and I feel very confident. And that just changed everything. That changed how I make decisions around how I take care of myself, changed how I make decisions around the people in my life, how I decide what I want to do in my life and live in my life, and confidence to go after what I want that I didn't have before. I was kind of just on a day by day, who cares about the future? It's all going to crumble one day. And then I got older and was like, oh, still alive. Better figure it out. Yeah.
Well, you're going to set me off in a moment. Also,
Good to
it's
try.
no, it's no shame in crying. Absolutely not. it's just like I mentioned my mother. It's abuse victims is close to home, and it's important to talk about. And see, this is one of the things I love with the free concept of this podcast. Things come up.
Yeah.
I This was not mentioned in your little blurb, so this was a subject that I don't think we've dived in. That probably has been talked about abuse on other episodes, but it's not been something that's been we haven't done a deep dive in it, and
Mhm.
it is important to know, especially if someone's listening or watching this, there are people who can help, and if you are a man or non-binary or woman, whatever you identify with, there are people out there that can help you,
Mhm.
and you shouldn't suffer silence.
Yeah.
And that's important. That's an important message, and you can get out. Tyler is what a proof.
Yeah, yeah, totally, Or you can also, sometimes I think these can be what seem like little moments in our life, but can hold a lot of weight as you go
Mm.
forward. And I think it's great to be able to, recognize that and, know that, you're not broken, and you are a good person, who deserves all the same things anyone else in life deserves. I think that can kind of be taken out of our radar, out of our realm of possibilities, when you go through experiences like that. So it's just a good reminder to know that you can do that. And that can be anything you want, right? Like that's what's amazing. That can be like, you know what, I'm going to be this kinky leather guy who lives in London and does everything I want. And no, 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 no. Goes here, there on my trip. That can mean you are like, you know what, I want to do this other thing with my life. I want to go move to the ocean and surf every day and, be able to drive home in a wetsuit. And you can kind of go for what you want, and there's kind of the sky's the limit. And I think that's a really great place to kind of end up at, and it's not to say that it's easy, you know,
No, 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 no. It's
um,
not easy at all.
but it's certainly possible. And I think that's what's important to remember. I never would have, I don't know, I am so happy to be where I'm at in my life because I never really would have thought that'd be possible, and going back to the kink and fetish side of it as well, yeah, we didn't talk about it. So I've always been into kink and fetish, and I always like that. And just as far as what I like, I enjoy leather, I enjoy rubber. I was always into fisting. That's what I stumbled across when I was a teenager and was like, oh my god, yes. And I had like that was also a big thing. When I stopped using, I was like, can I do that without drugs?
You know what? If I had a penny for every someone has said that to me when they become sober,
Yeah, right.
yeah,
You
yeah,
can.
yeah, you most definitely can. You most
Yeah.
definitely can.
Yeah, totally. And I enjoy all sorts of things. Like I love, power, not to say power play, but like dynamics, role play. I'm a sub and I enjoy being a sub a lot and exploring that. And it's
A
so
sir, not a master, because we are against the masters.
right, looking for the sir, but no gods, no masters.
There's a big difference. Ugh.
Right? If my young 21-year-old self could have put that together, I would have been living a lot
Do
more
you know
free
what?
life.
I always find that a lot of the people who are subs have like high positions or are bosses themselves, and they're just like the submissive part. So for me, I'm like sometimes in a scene, I'm a very bubbly, happy go lucky kind of person, but in a scene, I can be a fucking mean bastard,
Right.
which is very different to who I am as a person. So
Yeah.
sometimes you go for what is opposite either your kind of belief setting sometimes in the scene. So you wanting a sir and but being against establishment is kind of fun.
I know, right? You can pathologize the shit out
Oh,
of
there's a whole
gold,
we can
gold
make a whole
mine.
analytical report about that.
100%. Oh my gosh, so funny, but yeah.
So I do have to ask with the surfing, there's probably got to be a couple of listeners. Any excitement for the surf suit?
It's so funny. That just feels that I don't have a connection to that.
No, no, no. It was
Yeah,
pure curiosity because there will be some kinks listening to this and kind of going, "Ooh, I would love to see him in the surf suit."
I know. Well, this is the thing. So I surf in the northern Atlantic. So I, in summer, still wear a wetsuit because the
It's
ocean does.
it's pretty cold.
It gets up to about like in the summer you can get around 18 to 20 degrees because we're
Oh, that's
still
very
in the
good.
Gulf Stream. So it can get up and then it gets down to like 2 degrees in the winter. And I surf all year. So most of the time that I'm surfing, I'm wearing like a very thick wetsuit. So I kind of look more like the Michelin man.
So it's
So it
not
might
the
not be
sexy
the,
kind, it's more the
yeah, my,
keep warm
my
kind.
this much face, gloves, like, look like winter mitts, and I'm big feet because I'm wearing.
Oh, there is someone liking that idea already. I can guarantee you that. Guarantee. But it seems to my like reading what you're on your you talk about surfing, you talk about snowboarding, you talk about hiking. It seems like nature is really important to you.
It is, yeah. Yeah, I'm a very active person. I have a lot of energy, and that's also what I learned in my 20s. Like I just was putting that everything was extremes, right? So
Mm.
whether that was using it would be an extreme, but it was also like I like this thing, I'm diving in, I'm gonna figure it out, and I'm gonna bike 45 minutes across Montreal over a bridge and play water polo for an hour and a half and bike home and always extremes. I had a lot of energy. So it's actually been really good moving out east because I feel like I can be more active in a lot of ways, which is great. And there's such beautiful nature here, and I feel like I developed a really I always was, like I said, growing up, kind of half my time was spent in like, the woods and having a lot of freedom, and I hold a lot of special to that. And I love solitude and I love my time alone. So the woods kind of looking back, I'm like, that was what it was like for me as a kid. I love doing that. And so now it's been great to have access to that. And it's also just been really healing. I think I came to Nova Scotia with like these huge changes going on and healed around a lot of stuff that was happening in my life and, coming to terms with things in my life. And, I also like had a lot of experiences in my 20s that I'm not proud of my behavior and I'm not proud of different things that happened as well. And, different stuff just because I wasn't in tune with my emotions or things weren't in control and, not being honest with myself, so therefore not being honest with other people, and that sort of effect that had. So coming here was very healing, and I got really into hiking again, and I just love being in the woods for a few hours. I bring a hammock I can put on a tree, and I read a book, and it really forced me to kind of slow down and connect with myself. And I had a lot of really important moments in my recovery and in my healing around a lot of stuff that I feel very strongly connected to the ocean and to the woods. And that's been just a really great experience for me.
It's a lot of people when they're kind of like if their recovery is very tough and so on, sometimes it can be quite connected to the location they're at. I don't necessarily always agree with like if there's a massive drug problem, move to a different city or somewhere else. But it does sound like it was the right choice for you, absolutely, to change the location, change the setting just reconnect what's important to you, and that is a joy to have and listen to. And
Yeah,
also, I will reiterate, it's like, yeah, there were bad things in your 20s, but then again, if you took some of those bad things away, would you be the person you are today?
exactly.
That's the thing. As much as some of those things are painful and horrible and so on, it makes that whole package of I don't think I would be the person I am today if I hadn't had some of the experiences I had in my childhood and with my using. I would definitely not be doing this if I
100%, eh?
didn't have it.
Yeah. And, for me, I think too, we all, you having to kind of come to that terms of not being able to go back and change the past. That doesn't happen.
Yeah.
You can't do that. Right. So you kind of have to learn to make amends, and forgive yourself or, yeah, just kind of come to terms with things that have happened. But also, yeah, you can't go back in time. And so if you
No.
can find how that brought you to where you're at and good with where you're at, then I think that's like a really great thing, as well. I think for me too, if I look back in my 20s, like it was amazing. I had a great time and it really also like I hold a lot of the beliefs that I had then, I was still kind of hanging on to those as well now. I think I learned a lot about compassion and I learned a lot about art and creativity and all sorts of really great things and being sure of yourself and it's very cool and I appreciate that. And Montreal is an amazing city and changing the location. Yeah, that's what we're talking about too. I
Mm,
think for me, it was a good move. I don't think, I mean, who knows what would have happened?
yeah.
Because I think, me deciding eventually, like, not using was sort of like the nail in the coffin with a few things that I wanted to change in my
Mm,
life.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it definitely helped. And then also, who knows if I would have found that program that I was in
Well, that's
uh,
the thing. It's
too. So
sometimes things get put in front of you for a reason. I'm not a big believer in like higher power and stuff like that, but sometimes things just kind of align, which works out in for and normally things align when you start making the choice to stop using drugs for some reason. I don't know why.
yeah, for me, it was sort of like when I started to invest in myself. That's when
It's
things changed. And
I
like you, I
think
don't believe they had that higher, like I don't have much, I'm not a spiritual person and I wasn't raised religious. And,
yeah.
but I think, if I look back at all these changes, I think like, my gut knew what I needed. And somewhere in there, I was still connected to that gut feeling and I was following it, even if it was a very path of going all over the place.
Well,
It
that's
still
the
pulled me in a
thing.
direction.
That's the thing with recovery. It's not a linear path. It is ups and downs and hills and valleys and it's messy and
Yeah.
it's okay. If you come out on the other side a better person or a more healed person, great.
Yeah.
It's not perfection we're striving for. It's just to be better.
Yeah. 100%. And feel okay with your life and get to live the life you want and not feel like you're being held back, I think is really good. And and again, yeah, kind of going back to before, I look at my teen years and, when I look at kind of my trajectory of how it all happened, and my life and so many, great things. And I've had a lot of really great experiences and, and that whole, it doesn't like, it feels like another life too, because it's a long time ago, but
Mm,
that was a part of a thing that was really hard for me too, because it was using drugs was such an identity piece for me because it had been like, I'm involved in like drug users' rights and I'm telling people, yes, these are humans and you can, you know, use and still be a person in society and all these things and So I had a lot of like, it really, I had to do a lot of soul searching in there, when I was kind of like, this isn't working for me. And I'm like, oh, what does that mean if like, the thing I'm preaching and I can't actually do that? I felt like I was like letting down my ideologies and my values. And it took a while to really be like, you know what, it's okay to let that go. Like you can still believe those things. You can still believe in harm reduction. You can still believe in supporting people.
absolutely. And
Still believe in
I
rights
preach
for all
that
people.
so much on here. Harm
Yeah.
reduction is so important. That doesn't necessarily mean that a person eventually might stop because it just like with you, it stopped. It didn't work. It was not benefiting your life anymore. But you had the tools. You had some of the harm reduction tools to work that through.
Yeah.
And if you hadn't had that, it might have been an issue. We are coming to the end of our time, but one last question before we end the podcast. How much did that hurt? For anyone listening, I'm pointing to his throat because he has covered in tattoos on his neck.
The $1 million question. I mean, it hurt like all tattoos hurt. It was not the most painful tattoo I've had.
Oh,
My ribs were much more painful than my neck. Yeah, but it was. I feel like again, it's a long time ago. It was like 15 years ago. Forget how much it hurts, but it wasn't the worst thing in the world. I would definitely say I've had more painful tattoos. I was surprised, but yeah, it's very
it's
uncomfortable to get done because it's just
I
always
could
awkward.
imagine and the healing process afterwards as well.
Yeah, and like the Adam's apple, that was really annoying. I remember just like being on like you're lying on a table and you have to kind of put your head extra over and then you don't want the Adam's apple to move, so you'd be like, okay, don't swallow and hold your breath for like 30 seconds, I'm just going to tattoo, and you're like, okay, stop. Okay, ready, breathe again, okay, like, oh, it's just not a it was more uncomfortable than painful, I guess.
Just to round off, if anyone's watched or listened and they've connected with something you've said, where can they get a hold of you?
Well, I'm not really super big on like social media and the internet, and I don't use that too much. I keep a pretty tight social media group. I use it sort of for very particular things. I do have some sober fetish people that I've seen through here that I follow because I find that really inspiring. I do a lot of surf stuff, but I kind of keep it at that. So I think if you see me out in the wild, wonderful. Please come up, talk to me. I'm more than happy to meet some people and chat. But as far as an online thing, I'm probably not that guy, unfortunately.
That's fine. I was about to say, if anyone has a question for Tyler and they can't get a hold of him, send me a message and I'll relay to him. That's not a problem either.
There you go.
But thank you very much for coming on. It's been an absolute joy to talk to you.
That's so lovely. I really appreciate it. And again, thank you so much for putting this out. I have listened to a lot of the episodes and I've gleaned so many like pearls of wisdom. And even from like, I just listened to one of the recent ones that came out this season and was like, oh, that's great. That's really helpful for me. And you just kind of keep picking up those little nuggets as you go on, and you learn little things that kind of help you figure out who you are and what you need to stay on that track that you want to be on. And so I appreciate the podcast for that because I've definitely gleaned a lot of really great little things from it. So thank you for putting it out there and thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was Tyler this week. Thank you very much for listening or watching. It was absolute joy to talk to him. First time going to Canada, as far as I remember. I do have to go and visit at some point, but I'll see you next time. Stay sober, stay kinky, stay sexy, and go out and get piggy. Bye.